Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to this webinar on how to keep your website ADA compliant. Before we get started here, we kick things off, I just wanted to quickly go over the format of how we're going to conduct this webinar. So if you have any questions, what we're going to do is we're going to make Q&A available to you at the end of the short presentation that we have here. In the meantime, you can use the toolbar at the bottom of your screen and you can enter in your questions as they come along, and then we can address them at the very end. Also, I'll give everyone an opportunity to unmute themselves if you prefer to ask your questions directly to our presenter and panelist here. I'm going to go ahead and hand things off to Dakota, who is a web developer and designer here at Nims and Associates.
My name is Dakota Nims, and yes, there is a connection there. I am the son of the company's president, Patrick Nims. I am a website developer with Nims and Associates, and I have 6 years of coding experience. In this webinar, I will be going over what the ADA is and how that affects your website, how disingenuous lawyers have used that ADA to threaten businesses, 4 principles you can use to make your website ADA compliant, and then we will finish off with questions and feedback. I am not a lawyer and cannot provide any legal advice during this webinar or outside of it, but I am a web designer and I can help you understand how to make an accessible website that follows the web content accessibility guidelines to protect yourself from litigation. I will go into detail about that later and how to fix the most common issues that I find that violate that ADA guidelines, but you do not need to know any technical know-how about websites right now. So what exactly is the ADA? The ADA is the Americans with Disabilities Act. It was a civil rights law that was passed in 1990. The ADA prohibits businesses from discriminating against individuals with disabilities, and it was enacted after a powerful protest that was held at Washington, D.C., where the protesters who used wheelchairs made their way to the United States Capitol, where at the steps they unseated themselves and began to crawl up the stairs to symbolize and reveal the hardships and trials that many Americans with disabilities face in day-to-day life. There are different titles to the ADA that handle different aspects and areas of business. The one that we are most focused on today is Title III of the ADA, also known as public accommodations. That focuses on private businesses being accessible to all individuals, including those with disabilities. This usually relates to adding infrastructure to physical places of business, such as adding ramps and elevators as alternatives to stairs or uneven terrain. However, business websites are recognized by law as places of business, and thus they require public accommodation. Web ADA guidelines help everyone. There is a notion that the ADA only helps those who use a wheelchair and the legally blind, but that is incorrect. Web ADA guidelines are meant to accommodate many different types of disorder. For example, to be ADA compliant, websites need to have clear and contrasting text and background. This is obviously not intended for those who are blind, but those with poor eyesight. Eye disorders and diseases are one of the most common diseases in America, with 3 out of 4 American adults wearing prescription eyeglasses. You can see how text that is hard to read to a large swath of clients is detrimental to business. And it's also not just clear text, also isn't just helpful to those with poor eyesight. People with dyslexia, such as myself, will have an easier time reading with clear, definable text. And this is also beneficial to everybody because readable text is just that, easily readable. If someone is not able to access your website, that is a client lost. ADA guidelines help to create clear and intuitive websites, making it easier for all users to use. I did just tell a little lie. I said that the ADA has guidelines, but it technically does not have guidelines. ADA website compliance is not officially standardized by law. ADA, in reference to physical buildings and infrastructure, has a lot of precedents and standardized guidelines. There is, in comparison, a lot less precedents in Web ADA and no official guide. Lawsuits are judged on a case-to-case basis, and they rely on past ADA cases if applicable. But there is a lot of new and untested ground in the rhetoric and discourse of this law. Courts will often use an unofficial set of guidelines known as the Web Content Accessibility Guide, or the WCAG, which I will go into more detail later. All you need to know right now is that this is the de facto guideline that covers almost every element and aspect of web design and sets an international standard for website accessibility. But again, this still is not official. All these aspects make Web ADA lawsuits sound like a delicate set of proceedings that are tricky to navigate. And because of that, some disingenuous lawyers have utilized that unfamiliarity to threaten businesses. With all the good that ADA has done, like most laws, it has also been used in unscrupulous manners at times. So, how do lawyers actually utilize the ADA to take advantage of business owners? Well, over the past 6 years, there has been a 400% increase in ADA web lawsuits. This past year, in 2022, there was a record-breaking amount at over 3,000. Over 90% of these web ADA lawsuits were handled in the courts of California, Florida, and New York. These lawsuits affect companies of all sizes, but mainly medium to small size businesses. There have been big companies that have been hit with and lost Web ADA lawsuits. In one of the biggest cases, in the National Federation of the Blind v. Target, the National Federation of the Blind claimed that blind people could not access all the product information listed on the website and could not independently check out. This is an arguably important function of an online store, and Target lost this suit and paid millions of dollars in reparations and had to retool their website. But the companies aren't the ones who are most affected by this. Many website ADA lawsuits come from the same firms that specialize in targeting small to medium-sized businesses. They seek out websites belonging to businesses of these size and send out threat letters with the option to settle out of court for an exorbitant amount of money. They know that operations of these sizes do not have the time or resources to fight a court battle. And they also know that these businesses often don't have comprehensive knowledge of obscure web law. These lawyers are willing to exploit this in hopes that the litigant settles out of court. Lawyers will even try to send demand letters to websites that do pass ADA guidelines. One of my clients was hit with a threat letter despite the website being up to general ADA web accessibility standards. The lawyer likely did not have a case, but I still went in, checked the WCAG compliance for the site, and fixed any issues I found. These issues were admittedly negligible, but better safe than sorry. As far as I'm aware, the lawyer has not responded back. And if I may speculate, I believe that this lawyer thought he found an easy target and backed off when I assured my clients that they were safe. And they told him that, yes, their website was compliant. For this exact reason, it is very important to know how accessible your website is. And how does one avoid litigation? The best way to avoid demand letters is to follow the Web Content Accessibility Guide, or the WCAG, when creating and managing your website. The WCAG is a set of accessibility guidelines created by an international organization comprised of different tech universities across the world. It was created to set an international standard for websites in hopes of making a easily navigable World Wide Web. The WCAG 2.0, the most recent set of guidelines, is a comprehensive document that covers almost every aspect and element that could be on a website. Guidelines will specify specific website elements, such as photos, text, backgrounds, their use cases, and what properties they need to be accessible. Each guideline will be categorized under one of 4 principles and will have a level of conformance assigned to it. The guidelines are categorized on the document by 4 principles, which is perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust, or POUR. These are foundational to understanding and following the WCAG. Each guideline is also ranked with one of 3 levels of conformance. The higher the rank, the more exceptional it is in terms of accessibility. Level A is the lowest form of conformance as set by the creators of the WCAG. However, US courts see level A as substandard, and websites that only meet level A conformance do not have a strong case in these courts. Level AA meets level A and level AA requirements. This is the level of conformance that has withstood lawsuits. This is the criteria US courts of law have historically judged website accessibility by, and covers most accessibility use cases. The highest level, level AAA or AAA, is a gold standard. It meets all requirements, including the level AAA guidelines. But because of just how accessible it makes a website, it's not achievable for all web contents. Because of this, the AAA guidelines are something to shoot for, but are not mandatory. The WCAG is an extensive document that cannot be gone through in a single seminar, and it isn't meant to be memorized. It's like a dictionary in that it is a lifelong tool to be referenced throughout the practice of creating and maintaining websites. There are 2 ways to manually check a website. The W3C, the creators of the WCAG, offers over 150 tools to test your website. With these tools, you must check each individual web page multiple times, and it only provides a diagnostic and does not fix any actual issue with the website. There are also unofficial website checkers, which will check the entire website and all its contents. These are often inaccurate and with skewed or incorrect results, and these as well do not fix diagnostics, and are often used to attempt to sell a service. Manually checking websites is often the best way to check the ADA guidelines and conformance of a website. It's thorough, but it is an intricate system as you go through each guideline with each element. However, corrections can be made in real time as you are reviewing the code, and this can be done by yourself if you have the technical know-how, or by a web manager, like services we offer at Nims and Associates. Before I get into the last part of the presentation, which is the principles and the most common issues I find with websites, it's important to go over some basic concepts. First off is the anatomy of a web page. There are 2 parts of a web page. There is the front end and the back end. The front end is what users see. These are the menus, the images, sliders, videos, and content. If websites were an embroidery, this would be the front. It's neat, simple, beautiful, and it's what's supposed to be seen and viewed. The back end is a hidden lattice work of code that controls how everything looks and functions. If this was an embroidery, this would be the back of it. This is messy, confusing, but it is functional. Every visual element and tool of the front end of a website has a corresponding block of code in the back end. There is code in the back end that is not shown on the front end. When this hidden code is used to describe elements on a web page, this is called metadata and is useful for tools such as screen readers. Screen readers, these are important tools for people with visual impairments and are vital to understand before a website can be made accessible. A screen reader is a program that translates on-screen information as text-to-speech or Braille. Most screen reader users use keyboard arrow keys, the keyboard keys, to navigate on-screen information and content. Visual elements such as the user interface and photos is translated into descriptive text if metadata, that back-end code that is not shown, if that metadata exists, that can be shown through a screen reader. For example, if there's an image of a woman on a web page and it has the correct metadata, when a screen reader reviews that block, that image, it will output to the user saying, this is an image of a woman standing with dark brown curly hair, for example. There are free screen reader programs like NV Access. I use this when designing websites to make sure my elements are working correctly, provide the intended information. In conforming to the WCAG, it is important to have an understanding of its overarching principles. Not only are they good web philosophies, but they make looking up guidelines easy. If you want to see guidelines for the element, say, how do I make an image of text accessible? You would know to look under perceivable. Because the WCAG cannot be reviewed in one sitting, I will go over the 4 principles and highlight the most pertinent guidelines. The guidelines can all be found on the W3C website. Henry will post the link in chat for you. The first of the principles is perceivable. The perceivable principle is the principle of information and user interface components and how they must be presentable to users in ways they can perceive. The first of those guidelines, text alternatives, this states that all non-text content must have an alternative form of relaying that information. This is usually done in the form of text alternative metadata, as we spoke about. This is intended for screen readers. When this is not followed, the issue with this is that without alternative text, screen readers can miss important information and context. To follow this guideline, do give pictures descriptive alternative text and have all non-text UI properly labeled within its metadata. Most content management services like WordPress or Joomla will have built-in sections to add alternative metadata. However, if you're just working directly with the HTML code, you can use the alt attribute to add your information. The fourth guideline, distinguishable of this principle, is to make it easy for users to see and hear your content. This is intended for people with color blindness or poor sight. The issue that arises is that some websites have small UI, text, and lack contrast that cause confusion. To follow the guideline, do use text Q to denote 2 similar but different colored elements. Use a 3:1 contrast ratio between text and its background, and use relative measurements for text. This would be a percentage element or an EM measurement. The second principle, operable. This is the principle that all interface components and navigation must be operable. The first of the guidelines is keyboard accessibility. The website should be fully functional and should be fully accessed with a keyboard alone, like screen readers might use. This is intended for people who do not use a mouse. People who do not use a mouse might include those with visual or motor disorders who navigate using the keyboard alone. Do ensure that your keyboard controls all elements and provide keyboard triggered event handlers. For example, if there is a rearrangeable photo gallery with a drag and drop feature, also include the option to select, cut, and paste these items. The second guideline, enough time. This is to give users enough time to read user content. This is intended for anyone who has a delayed response to web-based activities. There are many users who need extra time to process and react to information. Some include users with vision, motor, or cognitive disorders, but this also includes users who are not fluent in the website's natural language or people who just read slowly. Do allow elements to be paused, stopped, or hidden, and provide an element that indicates how much time is left. This is usually for things like auto-playing videos on websites or slides that scroll through photos. And the fourth guideline, navigable, this provides ways to help users navigate, find content, and determine where they are. This is intended for everyone. Navigation is beneficial to every user. This is especially important for screen readers, as they are only able to access information one line of text at a time. Do title your web pages. Make sure that every web page has a descriptive title. Ensure that elements have a logical focus order that mimics the natural visual flow of the site. Use heading and labels, tag them in the order that they are categorized, and provide a cue when an interactable element is focused. The third principle, understandable, is the principle that information and the operation of the user interface must be understandable. The first guideline, readable, is to make sure that text is readable and understandable. This is intended for anyone who is not fluent in the website's language or has poor reading comprehension. Do you have the option for your site's text content to be translated into another language? There are many different web plugins that do this that you can find on your web content management services, WordPress or Joomla plugins, or you can add the plugins through the code itself. Google offers free translation tools. And the third guideline is input assistance. This is to help users avoid and correct mistakes. This is intended for anyone who might easily misinterpret instructions or input information incorrectly. Do you put error identification on input elements? For example, if you have a contact form, within the phone number form entry, if someone begins typing in, say, anything that's not a phone number, such as date of birth, make that responsive so that it can recognize that it is not a valid phone number and puts that out back to the user, telling them that this is the incorrect entry. And do you provide labels and instructions when content requires user input? The last principle is robust, and it only has one guideline, and that is compatible. The guideline and the principle is for content that must be robust enough that it can be interpreted by a wide variety of user agents, including assistive technologies. This is to maximize compatibility with current and future user agents, including assistive technologies. Essentially, confirm that your content is using markup languages in the correct order and that all of the code is working correctly, and make sure that you are using up-to-date tools to limit any possible errors that can happen between browser or assistive programs. That finishes this webinar with the last of the 4 principles of POUR. The WCAG 2.0 can be found at w3.org, and it goes into more detail and lists all of the guidelines. It is extremely comprehensive. You can find out how ADA compliant your website is by using automatic testing tools like we discussed before, although they either do not fix the issue or can be just inaccurate. Or the most comprehensive and thorough way is by manually checking the website, which can be performed by a web manager, like a service that Nims and Associates offers. That concludes the presentation. Hopefully, I have just demystified the website ADA lawsuits and provided tools for you to that you can use and help to empower yourself to look over your websites. And if you have any questions, please feel free to stick around or send me a message at dnims@nimsassociates.com. Thank you all again for your time.